Breaking news, Thomas Frank has been sacked from Tottenham Hotspur and Ange speaks out on Spurs. Okay, good morning everyone, welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. We've got an emergency record this morning in the studio, given what has happened in the last 48 hours at Tottenham Hotspur, which is obviously Thomas Frank being sacked as Spurs manager, as the club now sits in 16th place, just 5 points above the relegation zone. But there's a lot more going on in regards to what's happened with Thomas Frank, and obviously exclusive on the Overlap Stick to Football, Ange's comments on Spurs as a whole and how the club is ran. So, to be honest, this has come as a shock to me. I'm sure it's come as a shock to everyone else, but we are going to do our best to bring these two and merge these two. Obviously, we like to focus on the finer details, but this is a bit of a wider football, business, fan, club ownership type of video, which we're not really used to doing, but I'm going to give my best shot at it. So if you do enjoy the pieces, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to the Overlap Breakdown channel, and we'll bring you these every week. So obviously, Thomas Frank has averaged 1.12 points per game as Tottenham Hotspur boss in the Premier League, which is 29 points in 26 games, the lowest win rate of any Spurs manager in history to have played 5+ games, or to have taken charge of 5+ games. Obviously, yesterday after his loss to Newcastle at home, he said, "I'm convinced I will be in charge. I understand the question. I understand it's easy to point at me, but I also think it's never only the head coach or the ownership or the directors or the players or the staff. It's everyone." Now, going off them words, it's very easy to understand Ange Postecoglou's point of view in this this circus, it almost feels like, of the last 18 months. Now, I want to give you a bit more broader context to this. So I am going to throw a segment on your screen right now which encapsulates everything that Ange Postecoglou has said about Tottenham Hotspur in the last 18 months. And we're going to piggyback off the back of that to give our own thoughts and views.
What is that culture mentality that... What is that exists there that means it's difficult to succeed?
You look at that list of names and there isn't really a common thread through there as to what they're trying to do. And I do think part of Tottenham's DNA, for want of a better word, is they do like their team to play a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say with Maurizio, they were going down that path. Although, you know, at the same time, I think people have been too dismissive of Harry's influence through that period. Yeah. He's an unbelievable player. Yeah. If I had Harry the last 2 years, that first year we finished 5th, I'm convinced we would have finished in Champions League spots, you know. So even him leaving, like you can't plug that hole. It's just impossible. Yeah. So when you look at those managers, and like I said, they've gone from, you know, Maurizio, who played a certain way and sort of, I think, fit the DNA. And then the big thing was, well, they haven't won anything. We need winners. So let's go for, you know, Jose gets them to a cup final and they sack him the week before the cup. So you're going, if you're talking about winners, well, in a one-off game, I wouldn't mind Jose being my manager at my club just for a one-off game. What happens beyond that is... And then, you know, then it was Antonio, because again, he's another winner, you know, and then Antonio goes and I sort of come in, they say, well, we want the football, you know. With Antonio, we made Champions League, but we didn't have the football. So we want the football and you've got the football, even though my DNA is I'll win as well. So then we go down that path, and then... So that's what I mean. It's a real curious in terms of understanding what are they trying to build? You know, what are they? Is it... There's obviously... They've built an unbelievable stadium, unbelievable training facilities. But when you look at the expenditure, particularly, you know, in their wages structure, they're not a big club. I saw that because when we were trying to sign players, we weren't in the market for those players.
Not a big club in terms of the wages that you pay, because the money, the sort of the transfer fees, not the biggest in the league.
They're always there or thereabouts.
But there's a cap, is there, on wages that won't be broken?
Yeah. There's certain players that I mean, at the end of my first year when we finished 5th, for me, okay, how do you go from 5th to really challenging? Well, we had to sign Premier League ready players. But finishing 5th that year didn't get us Champions League. We didn't have the money. So we ended up signing Dom Solanke, who was absolutely, I was really keen on him, I really like him, and 3 teenagers. You know, I was looking at Pedro Neto and Buemo and Semenyo at the time, Mark Gahey, because I said, if we're going to go from 5th to there, that's what the other big clubs would do in that moment. And those 3 teenagers are outstanding young players. Brilliant young, and I think they'll be great players for Tottenham, but they're not going to get you from 5th to 4th and 3rd. But what was coming out from the club was that, no, we're a club that can compete on all fronts.
Okay, so we're talking about, or what Ange is talking about, and I think he's brilliant in sort of the light he's putting himself in terms of judging what Tottenham have been like from year to year, from appointment to appointment. He's mentioned the managerial appointments, the shift in strategy, and how desperate Tottenham were to win a trophy, and obviously that come under Ange Postecoglou. But if we take it from Maurizio Pochettino, obviously he departed the club in 2019. Jose Mourinho then coming, which is a completely massive shift in what Tottenham were looking to do. And then he was sacked before the EFL Cup final, which Ryan Mason took charge of against Manchester City and against Pep Guardiola. Now, already to me, I think everyone thought this at the time, bizarre decision to do that. And it felt like already there's a bit of knee-jerking going on from Tottenham. But from then, they end up getting Nuno Espirito Santo, who again plays a little bit more reserved football. And still, to me, across these last two appointments after Pochettino, and Ange says it himself, I do think Spurs have a DNA. And I'm not here to blemish over the Thomas Frank reign. I think we covered it multiple times on this channel, how stagnant they were, how static they were, and more importantly to me, why they didn't play with the Spurs DNA. And this DNA word's been thrown about so much, but if we just look at the board and we go on to talk about the tactics of what Thomas Frank was doing, we analysed it so much on the channel as to why it was stiff, why it just didn't work. And we set up it mostly before the injuries start to kick in, which is another string to another argument of this Thomas Frank Spurs tenure, is just how passive they were in the overall build-up. It felt that we often seen this 4-2 shape. He ended up going to more of a defensive double pivot to try and win games, and a lot of people then started to label Thomas Frank as this pragmatist manager, pragmatism, and adapting all the time. And I thought we'd see tweaks the other way. I thought we'd see Thomas Frank push for games. And a lot of people don't agree, a lot of people do agree maybe. I think Tottenham do have a DNA. I think they do have an ethos. I think they're a relentless attacking team. I think they take risks, and I think they play enjoyable football. I think every time you think of White Hart Lane, you think of Spurs, no one wanted to go there. They press you off the park. They're relentless in the running, the chance creation. They had wicked wide players. And it does feel like in the last 5 years at Spurs, they have somewhat lost that character, all because of this idea that they are Spursy and they need to win trophies. And you can tell that in the appointments. Jose Mourinho, Espirito Santo, obviously not a proven winner, but someone who plays this more reserved approach, who likes to hit bigger spaces, which automatically, in my mind, thinks of you as a cup manager, a manager who can win a cup, a manager who can win them one-off games. We've seen Santo do it for years and years. And then after that, they went for Antonio Conte, and all of these managers, even towards the back end of Postecoglou's reign, all of these managers had this tetchiness with the board, this idea that they're being brought in to win trophies, but the ambition from the club is not there to win trophies. And when we talk about ambition, it's obviously the style, the way the team plays, the way the fans get to the team, the connection between the fans, the team, the players, everything, the manager more importantly. Even after Ange left Tottenham in the summer, there was still that connection because he'd won, but also a lot of Spurs fans look back on that and go, yeah, it weren't great, and yes, they were only, a place above the relegation zone, but they played a style that I would familiarise Tottenham with, and I don't think they've not encapsulated that in their appointments, and more importantly, they've not encapsulated that in their summer signings for the last 4 or 5 years. And I'm trying to speak a little bit like a Tottenham fan, because I've been there with my club. I've been there. We've had managers where Manchester United, where we've jumped from ship to ship, going from an LVG, Louis van Gaal style to a Mourinho style, then back to a young manager who has all these big lads who like to play a little bit older of a squad. And then Ole Gunnar Solskjaer comes in, tries to get the young element of it. And then we go to a back three manager. And then we go to Ten Hag or the other way around. And it's so much chopping and changing. But I think the one thing that's always carried Manchester United through in that is that they can attract the best players. And your wage bill often reflects how good you perform as a team on the pitch, because the player quality is there because of the money you're spending. And in Ange Postecoglou's own words, he's talking about Spurs not having that financial edge to their thinking. He often referenced the dare to do that's around Tottenham. I look at Tottenham and I go, they do dare to do in terms of their football style, not in terms of the cups, not in terms of the trophies they win, but they are a team that are relentless. They are high pressing, and whether or not this comes from Maurizio Pochettino or it's just in my head thinking about the players they had, but they never really wanted, for me, from the outside looking in, financially to close that gap. They never did go to get the best player outside the top six. Ange obviously often references players like Semenyo, Mbeumo, I think Pedro Neto was in there, Mark Guéhi, and I've gone and got their signings for the last few years, and if you actually look at it, don't get me wrong, there's some stellar pieces of business in here. We've got Xavi Simons from Leipzig, Mohamed Kudus from West Ham, Conor Gallagher from Atletico, obviously, but Richarlison from Everton, Yves Bissouma from Brighton, Spence from Middlesbrough, Solanke from Bournemouth, Archie Gray from Leeds. And if we just look at what they've done in the market and when they have been as a football club, I remember Pochettino getting top four when they had no players coming in, when they had these young lads who were coming in, and Maurizio Pochettino would make them better. But eventually it gets to a point when the rest of the league is spending extortionate amount of money. We're looking at Arsenal, we're looking at Manchester City, even Manchester United and Chelsea. They are attracting big players, and they are attracting players who, no matter who the manager is, the player quality will get them into a certain position. And Ange Postecoglou arrived at this scenario where we're looking at players like, don't get me wrong, these are cracking players. James Maddison, Brennan Johnson, Dom Solanke, Archie Gray, Lucas Bergvall, Richarlison. They are great players, but are they Champions League quality players? Are they players that move the needle enough for Spurs to make that jump? I wouldn't say so. And obviously they are in the Champions League and they are in the knockouts, and there's a lot to play for. They play Arsenal in, I think, 10 days. There's a lot of time between them now and the North London derby, and God knows who will take over as the caretaker or eventual permanent manager. But for me, I do think Spurs have just got it wrong from a boardroom standpoint. I think the way they've recruited in the market, the managers they've gone for, the styles they've bounced to and from. Ange often referenced that when he got fifth at Spurs, they went and signed two teenagers, which again, cracking players. Archie Gray, Lucas Bergvall, I'm a fan of them both. They will have good careers. They're cracking players, and the responsibility they take on at such a big club is magnificent how they're doing it. But they're not players that are going to push a team to the Champions League places for the next coming years. And if we're looking at the likes of Manchester United, you've got Brian Mbeumo and Mateus Cunha, make of them what you will, but you've got Manchester City doing Semenyo, Guéhi, Arsenal going out 100 million on rights. These are clubs that, in their idea, they always have the best players. And Spurs' recruitment has been brilliant in some regards over the last few years. They've got Van der Ven, they've got Christian Romero, Dom Solanke I think is a great player, Kulusevski, great player. But it just feels like the ambition wasn't quite there. And I'm going to throw this on now to talk about Thomas Frank's Tottenham and why, for me, it's a tough decision to make, but we did say it was going to get a lot worse for him. And obviously the injuries had stacked up to a point where it felt like it was going to get worse. Their underlying numbers never, ever looked great under Thomas Frank, and that is not a good sign for a manager. We often talk about how straight-lined their 4-4-2 build-up was, with the four across here and everything being so straight and so limited on the ball. We're talking about Romero to Spence, and then we're looking at this, or Porro, and we're looking at these straight lines. Everything's just really static and hard to break through teams. There's been adaptations from Thomas Frank towards the back end of his stint, mostly because of injuries, and they have bought players like Conor Gallagher, João Palhinha, but they are players that I would associate with the old brands of football. You are now coming into it, and Ange Postecoglou got a team in his idea of a technical young team. That's what they went for in the market under Ange. Lucas Bergvall, Archie Gray, I wouldn't describe them as physical first players. I'd describe them as drop of the shoulder, nimble midfielders who are these eights who play a little bit more in front. Then you get Thomas Frank in, and then it's almost like back to basics, and we're going for João Palhinha, Conor Gallagher. Don't get me wrong, great players. But it's the mismatch of recruitment, managers, play styles that doesn't bode well long term for a Tottenham team. And I think now they're in a really, really rough position. The Premier League is going into a phase where a lot of teams are pressing man for man, and physicality is becoming the bread and butter of the Premier League, because often all of the passing lanes are shut off. We often see these long punts into the number 9, and then we're looking for the second balls, the duels in midfield. Look at Arsenal. You know, they are one of the best teams, if not the best team in the world, because they play on that quality, on that physical quality. City have even gone somewhat towards that physical, you know, end of the spectrum with likes of Semenyo. So, and Donnarumma, Ruben Diaz, they are not like technicians. You wouldn't describe them as these, you know, pretty on the eye players, pet players, but they get the job done because they are dominant in their own areas on the pitch. And Spurs, I think, have tried to catch up with that with appointing Thomas Frank, but then they're not even recruiting the best physical players for that. And now you're looking at a point where Spurs sit 16th in the Premier League. They're out of the FA Cup. They're obviously out of the Carabao Cup. They're in the knockout stages of the Champions League, and there's still a little bit to play for them. But their idea on the pitch the squad is not necessarily a mess, but it's picking up injuries, and there is such a distinct variance and variety in their skill sets. We're looking at players like, you've got a midfield of James Maddison, Archie Gray, Lucas Bergvall, who are all these nimble midfielders you can drop the shoulder, take the ball under pressure, combined with these players like Bentancur, Palhinha, Conor Gallagher, who are the opposite end of that, who are players who like to win the ball deep, who like to duel and break forward with the ball in these fast sprints. And then you look at the forward line, they've got players like Odegaard, who are these technical, you know, two-touch, one-touch dribbly wingers. And it looks a mess. And I didn't think Thomas Frank was doing well at Spurs. I do think the injuries had a lot to hamper, but I didn't like the style of play. And I think with Spurs, you always have to look for that edge in the style of play. You have to play that attractive front foot football to get the buy-in from the fans. And there wasn't ever a moment of that buy-in. We've seen the one-off games, the PSG Super Cup, great adaptive performance. But long-term in the Premier League, it just looked a bit, you know, weak and stodgy in there. And Thomas Frank has the worst win rate out of any Big Six manager in Premier League history, beating the likes of Amorim, Graham Potter, Roy Hodgson, Ange Postecoglou. You know, these are stats that are reality. And most importantly, in the piece where Ange talks a lot about Spurs and what they're doing, they often mention the facilities, the upgrade, the stadium, how marvellous the new stadium is. Well, Spurs are bottom 3 on the home table in the Premier League. You know, they've got less points at home than West Ham. They've got 10 points out of 13 games at home. Like, that's not good enough. That is a team and a collection of players, mentality, squad building, managerial appointments, a mess where you don't really fear going to the Tottenham Stadium. Everyone remembers White Hart Lane. Everyone remembers how tough it was to go there. You know, it was like hell on earth in that place. And now it just feels there's this, from the business element, from the structure in terms of how they built the club, they built it on a cost-cutting measure-ish. They never really exceed a certain bill. But now it felt like you've got Tottenham into a position where their fans are daring to do, and the club isn't daring to do. They're daring to stay and remain and build on a cost-cutting measure. And I don't think Spurs have ever had the financial power or the mentality to push for them, you know, for them upper echelon spots. And everyone around them is chucking so much money at it and going for the throttle and going for the throat of things. You know, Liverpool spent a ridiculous amount of money in the summer. Manchester City went and spent a ridiculous amount of money in the summer and January. Manchester United, a ridiculous amount of money in the summer. Chelsea, for all the stick they give them, they've got world-class players. They've bought world-class players. And Spurs now are in a position where they've got a lot of 50, 60 million pound lads, and everyone around them is moving forward and they're remaining, and they are almost putting a cap on what they can do on the football pitch because of the way they've been ran from a managerial standpoint and a player standpoint, a business standpoint, a buying, recruitment standpoint. And there's a lot of problems at Tottenham, a lot of problems. And I do think that Thomas Frank, in my opinion, I think he did have to, I do think he had to go, because I don't associate the football that he was playing with this Spurs, and I do get the caveat of injuries, but Spurs cannot be bottom 3 on a home Premier League table below West Ham. They cannot be there. And the football doesn't fill you with hope that the performances were going to come eventually, especially at home. I've got some of their data under Thomas Frank. So XG, 17th in the league for expected goals. That's ridiculously bad for a top 6 team. Their expected goals performance, which shows their overperformance of their chances they were making. They have scored 8 more goals than they should have on the underlying numbers, which is the most out of any team in the league. Was that ever sustainable? Well, it's not now. We can see that now. It wasn't sustainable. And we've got more stats. Total fast breaks. We're looking at Tottenham to be that front-footed aggressive team. 17th. Goals conceded, 11th. XG against, 14th. So they're not even defensively sound for all the pragmatism. Errors leading to goals, 18th. Errors leading to shots, last in the Prem. That's ridiculously poor. And I think you can talk about... It's really funny because obviously Manchester United just played West Ham and people are talking about the relegation. If you do look at the teams around Tottenham Hotspur, Forest and West Ham, they've got magnificent players. You know, Morgan Gibbs-White, he's a great player. Elliot Anderson, great player. Probably could go for 80, 90, 100 million pounds. West Ham, I've got some terrific players. Juve, Mateus Fernandes, Somerville, Bowen. They've got great players. And I don't think Tottenham's squad at the current time we're talking right here is a marvellous squad. I don't think it's absolutely 100% top half of the table. I think it is a mess. I think it's a real big mess. And they have got injuries. They've got injuries to massive players, especially Dejan Kulusevski, I'm a massive fan of. But there has to be an element of, yes, Thomas Frank did have to go because, in my opinion, the style wasn't there. And I do think he was too pragmatic. I don't think he gave the home fans time to get behind his idea. They never really seen his idea. I don't know what the idea was. But what he's working with is really bad and a massive mismatch. And it just shows you the Conor Gallagher deal in the January transfer window. A lot of Tottenham fans turn their nose up at it. But it's quite clear that Thomas Frank went, listen, I've got nothing in midfield here, because all the other midfielders that were signed before him are all completely the opposite of what he's trying to do. So we're looking at a club who doesn't know if they want to win trophies, they don't know if they want to be a cup team, they don't know if they want to go late into Europe, and they don't know if they want to play front-footed aggressive football and not really care about the points and excite people. They are stuck between so many different ideas, and I think it could get not worse, because it physically can't get worse unless it's relegated. But we're talking about managers coming into this team. The squad's a mess. It's bad. I do sympathise a lot with Spurs fans, because it did feel like the Europa League took away that idea of being Spursy. But it now feels like they've arrived at a point where everything is an absolute mess. And I don't doubt that the timeline will be talking about new managers and what a new manager can bring. I don't know what this squad suits from a managerial play style perspective. I don't know what it suits. We've seen it in a 3-back, I've seen it in a 4-back, I've seen it play high pressing, gung-ho football, I've seen it play low block football. Didn't really look like any of it worked, probably because they bounced to and from. But yeah, really, really sad one for Spurs, because I can imagine how big the optimism was after the Europa League final victory, and yeah, it's a rough one. And let us know what you've made of Thomas Frank and Ange Postecoglou's comments on the main Overlap channel on Stick to Football. Don't be, obviously, go and watch that if you haven't already. But yeah, let us know what you've made of everything around Spurs, what they do in the future. And we're back next week for some more analysis on the Overlap Breakdown channel. So don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Thank you very much.